Welcome back to the podcast, Emma.
Thanks for having me back, Jack.
Yeah,
Always
you've
a pleasure.
becoming a regular at this point, popping up and down on this. This is a very quick turnaround because I'm going to be releasing this podcast today because obviously time is of the essence. But essentially, rivers are a major theme and a major point for a lot of people in this election. And I thought
Mm.
who better than to ask the Rivers Trust about some of the key points that if people are thinking about voting for a specific party, what they should be asking their campaigners. And the Rivers Trust, very handily, have put together some notes for this. So I thought it might be worth us kind of going through what people should be asking their candidates and the party that they may want to go with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people are voting with, I mean, not just the rivers, but nature and climate in general,
Yeah.
is very high up on our kind of agendas at the moment as the public. And yet, being the Rivers Trust, we've gone through party manifestos and we've made a list of things that we want to see the incoming government do. And I think one of the things that we've seen quite a lot is people saying, well, listen, what do I say? You know, everybody's getting knocks on their doors and they want to be useful and they want to have conversations that make sure that things they're interested in are noted and are taken on board by the people they're talking to. So yeah, we came up with 5 questions that people can ask their candidates when they come knocking in the last 2 days before an election.
Which yeah, they will do. They're getting desperate, aren't they? They need to get on this. So should we go through these 5 questions and just dissect them a little bit?
Yeah, let's do it. So the
Okay.
first one, and I think this is one that's probably going to come up quite a lot, is how will you and your party tackle all forms of pollution in our rivers? And we've
Yeah.
we've written it that way because sewage is going to come up a lot. That's fantastic. I mean, the public appetite for wanting action on sewage pollution, oh my gosh, it's fantastic. I'm bowled over by it. But sewage isn't the only issue. Like we definitely need to fix sewage, but we also need to fix all of the pollution that's coming off of agriculture and also things like road runoff and chemical pollution. They are also devastating our rivers. So, you know, well, it might be tempting for politicians to purely look at sewage because that's the thing that will draw the headlines, and that is great. It does need to be done. But we want to see sort of more holistic catchment based approaches to all of the pollutants that are tackling our rivers, not just the ones that might make a nice headline.
I think that's a really good point because yeah, sewage is such a an easy grab for a tabloid or an eye-catching thing. If you meet someone, you go, oh, there's thousands and thousands of tons of shit being dumped into rivers. That's going to get people's imagination straight away. Whereas if you say, well, there are some chemicals leaking off a field, it's not quite as sexy and is getting the point across. And arguably, agricultural pollution is a bigger problem, dare I say. But that's a politically a much more complex thing to deal with because then you
Mm.
get into dealing with farmers and food production, and that's politicians are maybe a little bit reluctant to kind of pull the lion's tail on that. Whereas poo going into rivers is a much easier sell, I would argue, for some of these guys. So I think it's great that you are covering all of that because yeah, it's not just sewage. There are lots of other problems and pollution going into rivers. I guess sewage is the gateway drug for people to get into this, and then they can. That's a strange sentence, isn't it? But then they can kind of look into some
Hey,
of the other
working in
problems.
river restoration, you find yourself talking about sewage through all manner of mechanisms. So
Yeah.
if we now know it as a gateway drug for talking about pollution, then that's a whole new branding, and I like it. But
Okay.
no, I mean you're totally right. It does open the door to a lot of deeper conversations. And some of our research, when we looked at what's known as the WFD, the Water Framework Directive, um, data on rivers in England, river stretches, more of them are failing their health tests because of agriculture than they are sewage. So really, sewage is a great way to talk to people about the fact that our rivers are being absolutely pumped full of in all manner of things, types of crap. But actually, if you're worried about that, that's really just sort of the tip of the iceberg in some
Yes.
cases.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's so much else also happening that really, really urgently needs addressing.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. What's the next point? What's the next question?
The next one's broader,
Okay.
and is just, how will your party work with nature to improve river health and tackle climate change? Because, you can get a lot of uh, concrete based and grey infrastructure to look at river health or climate change, but actually we want to see nature based solutions. We want to see people working with nature to restore nature. Things like wetlands, for example, and tree planting and leaky dams, and basically allowing a landscape in a catchment to hold more water is a fantastic way of slowing the flow, of reducing drought, and of like improving water quality and creating habitat for fish and all other aquatic life. Um, excuse me. And it's so much better than just thinking, okay, well, we'll bung a new reservoir in here to hold the water out of concrete, which is a fairly polluting resource anyway.
Yeah.
It has so many more benefits. So we want to make sure that the solutions that are being put forward are ones which are one inspired by and use and work with nature, not against it.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, and obviously kind of go with the flow if that makes sense with a river. Sort of see how many river puns I can fit
Very well done.
into this. What's the next one?
So the next one is, will your party boost funding for regulators and strengthen enforcement so that polluters are made to pay for their pollution? I think everyone can agree that the polluters paying is a principle that a lot of people stand behind. And we just want to see that the mechanisms are in place and are strengthened to be able to actually do that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. I mean, it's kind of on the level, or if not maybe even worse than like the recent post office scandal. The way that's kind of going on with this sort of system that we've got set up, where water companies are essentially paying dividends to their shareholders, but not putting back into
Mm.
the infrastructure. And then, like you say, if they are getting away with um, allegedly, willfully polluting these waterways, and then at best getting a slap on the wrist, and quite often not a lot, there needs to be tougher penalties to discourage them. Because I guess one of the issues at the moment is that it's cheaper to pollute than it is to not pollute. And if you're a
Mm.
multi-million pound company, then you're just going to pollute. You're not going to give a shit about, well, you are giving a shit. That's the problem. That's too much of the problem.
You're
Um,
giving many of them, sure.
yeah,
And
so
well, one of
that's
the other things is there's just not enough data as well. We need
yeah.
we need actually to be able to have the resources to monitor pollution and to have enough evidence to be able to hold polluters to account too, because we all anecdotally know that pollution is happening, but you really need robust data and evidence to be able to take that forward and drive forward the polluter pays.
Because I mean, it's one of the sad things, but also kind of heartwarming things, is that kind of citizen science has taken up so much in recently, where ordinary people are going out of their way to buy test kits to monitor when it shouldn't be up to them. There should be
Mm.
people and organizations who are doing this anyway, and yet it's literally members of the public who are having to kind of test and go and visit their rivers to see these problems, which is, yeah, it's not how it should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, citizen science is such a fantastic resource. It is in some ways wonderful that people really want to help, and there are ways that they can help. But you're right. Although it can plug gaps, there really shouldn't be as many gaps in the environmental monitoring that we currently have.
Yeah, no, for sure. What are we on? Number four. What's your fourth question?
Next one. So this is, how is your party going to open up rivers and blue spaces in our towns and our cities to support our health and well-being? Because we all know that being outside, engaged with nature, our green spaces, our blue spaces is wonderful for us physically, mentally. We need to be able to have access to and be able to spend time in these places.
Yeah, makes complete sense. When you're saying kind of open up, so what are you meaning? Like areas just where there's literally no access to rivers in towns and cities, like where it's just sort of a high concrete path that you can't get near the river? Like what are you mean
Yeah, I mean, I
specifically?
think it's fairly open-ended, that one. I think there's lots
Yeah,
of
okay.
different ways that you can open up spaces and green spaces, but whether it's also just renaturalizing certain water courses that are in or around urban environments that just aren't very healthy, even just improving
Right.
the health of
I
those
see.
can create a blue space that's better for our well-being too. And, allowing pathways. And so if we're creating like a river buffer, for example, sort of space either side of a river that's renaturalized, not only is that great for the river, that could potentially include a footpath which allows people in to be a part of that environment and to soak up all the well-being benefits too.
Sorry, I had to put that on mute then because my dogs were going absolutely mental because someone knocked on the door. So hopefully you didn't get them barking too much. But yeah, no, I completely agree that that all makes complete sense, and um allowing us more access, but also I guess wildlife and more natural processes there. So final question to candidates. What's the last one?
Final one. How is your party going to support farmers and businesses in managing their land sustainably for water? We can't just go after water companies or
Mm.
polluters or of any forms. We need to make sure that landowners and farmers, who are the custodians of much of our countryside, feel empowered and financially empowered to be able to manage their land in ways which is brilliant for nature, brilliant for climate, and brilliant for our water. So we need government to be able to put in robust mechanisms to be able to support them to do that.
Yeah, because there's, I mean, I suppose particularly in England, but other parts of the UK as well, a lot of these rivers are going through farmland and private land that's not really access to the public, and it is the landowner's responsibility. And you would hope that they would want to look after the rivers and keep them healthy and support them, but at the same time have them as an asset for their own land management.
And a lot of the time, some of the nature-based solutions and things that we're proposing, um, oh, I've lost you there. Sorry, I don't know whether I cut out. I seem to be
No,
back. I'll start that again.
that's okay. Go for it. Yeah.
A lot of the time, some of the nature-based solutions and water management things that we're proposing, like tree planting or re-wiggling a river or installing leaky dams or creating these kind of buffer strips, so taking some land out of necessarily arable production and allowing it to be renaturalized and allowing sort of wild vegetation in. There really does need to be a financial incentive to do that work and to not see that as giving up productive land for another
Yes.
purpose. They can be quite big projects, particularly if you want to do them on a really big scale to have a great impact on the catchment. We can't expect people to do that for free, even as much as they would probably like to. If it's their land, it's their business, it's their livelihood that's involved. They need supporting to be able to do that.
Nope, completely agree. That all makes complete sense. You were at the march the other week, weren't you? The Restore Nature March.
Yeah, what an amazing event that was. Yeah, I did go.
So just in case people, because there seemed to be like a media blackout on that for some reason, like a lot of big news channels and stuff really didn't report on it. So can you just say like what it was and what it was like being there?
So, about 60,000 people took to the streets of London as part of a huge and incredibly joyful, wonderful, and energetic in all the right ways march from Hyde Park to Parliament. And there were about 400 environmental and non environmental organisations that were involved in putting that together and that were represented there. And then we were all sort of sectioned off into blocks because there were so many of us. So the Rivers Trust were in the water block and we spoke to the crowds there. And there was obviously also a land block, I think an air block and an animal block. And we were led by various celebrities, and we all sort of very gently, but with lots of music and speeches and amazing signs, loads of puns, just slowly marched through London for a couple of hours. And it was amazing because the energy was fantastic. And everybody was there with the common goal of we want nature to be restored. We need that to be a priority for the incoming government. But everybody was also representing their own little pocket or their little interests that they've got. So, there were people shouting for rivers. There were also people shouting for butterflies, for bats, for all sorts. It was inspiring. It honestly was one of my favourite days this year, to be surrounded by that many people who really cared and were doing so in a very sort of collaborative, fun way. It was amazing. It was really, really good.
Because obviously, I mean, I'm within that sort of nature bubble on social media, so a lot of people that I knew were there. I couldn't make it, unfortunately, but there were a lot of people I knew. But when I looked at kind of wide, I think the Guardian might have commented on it, but that was about
The
it.
Guardian
Like,
did a fair bit to be
yeah,
fair to the Guardian, they covered us quite a lot. But yeah, it is interesting to see which maybe outlets were not interested in covering the fact that over 60,000 people walked through central London for nature. It was a
you,
little bit of a shame, perhaps, but
yeah, you would think it's worth a little mention, wouldn't you? But there you go. It's a strange one. I'm not sure how well you can answer this, being with the charity position, or whether you want to remain neutral. But do you feel that in the last 14 years that we've been under a Tory government, do you feel like rivers are in a worse place now than they were 14 years ago, or are you you're pulling a face? What, do you have to be careful what you
well,
say?
I'm squirming because I'm here in my official capacity, but
Okay,
also I
okay,
wasn't working in rivers 14 years ago.
no,
So if people are interested in learning what the current state of our rivers is and how that has changed. We do
Yeah.
have reports that can give you insight into that.
Okay.
So I'll plug everyone towards the Rivers Trust State of our Rivers report, but I'm not going to go and make some bold statements when I don't have all the facts.
Okay. All right. No worries. Well,
Ready.
well,
Sorry. That meant I felt like a politician then. I was
no,
squirming. I don't know what the line is.
I know exactly. Yeah, I was just picturing like your Michael Gove impression was bang on. Then you were just sort of going for it.
Oh no.
No, well, I mean, I can somewhat answer that for you because I my career started 12 years ago in rivers, and anecdotally, but I've been in a river or two in my time. I would say that rivers are almost certainly in a worse state than what they were when I started. And I can't remember if we mentioned this before when I've spoken to you in the past, but the three criteria I judge rivers by are clarity of water, the amount of fish in them, and the amount of aquatic plants. And if
Mm,
you get all three of those in a river, like lots of fish, lots of clear water, lots of plants, it's generally a healthy river. And when I started, I wouldn't say that was easy to find, but I wasn't struggling to find that. Whereas fast forward to 2024 now, I am really struggling to find a river that has all three of those criteria. I can find clear rivers, but there's no
mm.
plants and no fish in them. I can find rivers with lots of fish in them, but they're not very clear and not many plants. And occasionally I can find a river with lots of plants, but there's not a lot else going in there. So it tells you some. I know that's anecdotal, but that's just I spend a lot of time by rivers, and there are rivers that I would go to 10 years ago that now I go to, and they've changed quite drastically.
I think a lot of people have very similar experiences, anecdotal or otherwise.
Yeah.
I would say that in I would say that the needle has not moved negatively for all rivers because some projects, particularly things that we've been involved in, you can see the positive improvement that is possible when you do things like nature-based solutions and you
Yes.
cut down on pollution. But certainly the picture as a whole is not a particularly positive one.
I think that is an important thing to mention as well, is that it's a very broad statement, isn't it? Saying that all rivers have there's been declines on many rivers, but every river is different, and that needle is going to sway. If you look at say the River Wye,
Mm,
that's been quite a dramatic change, but then you might take well, the Trent, for example, my local river Trent, is in a relatively healthy state, given all the pressures that it has. So yeah, it's going to be different on each river. But yeah, I think if you took them all as a whole, the needle
mm.
swinging more towards things going the wrong way would be my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to colleagues that work up on the Don recently, and they were
Yeah.
saying, 30, 40 years ago, they anecdotally called the Don dead. But because of
Yes.
the work that they've been doing up there in opening up fish passage and improving the actual water quality, they've seen salmon return. And that's a
Yeah.
hugely inspiring and amazing story. It's just sad that it's kind of a relatively isolated one and we're not seeing
Yeah.
that everywhere. But it does prove that it is possible. And if we go really full circle, if the government commits to doing the things that we want them to do in the questions that we outlined earlier, that doesn't have to be an isolated story, and we could see that in so many of our catchments.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because one of the things I've noticed in the last 2 or 3 years is it's almost a crime to celebrate anything positive with rivers. Or this is my personal experience anyway, where I might find out about a story or I might see something and I'll put something online and immediately someone will mention, oh, well, that
Mm.
river's probably full of turds or that river's, and it's like, it's not a bad thing to celebrate something that's going well. There are some things that are working. Admittedly, there's a lot that isn't, but some things are working and we shouldn't shun or be too pessimistic about them.
No, I agree. We do have to celebrate the wins, particularly when
Yeah.
there are teams of people that have worked really hard behind the wins.
Yeah.
And also, if you only focus on the negative, goodness me, we're just going to all up frightfully depressed and never get anything done. I think there does have to be some optimism that drives hope, that drives action sometimes.
Definitely. No, I think that's the case. And I think it's a nice way how the Rivers Trust has put this out. Whereas, as far as I know, you're not telling anyone who to vote for. You're just giving
No.
everyone the equipment and the knowledge that they need to push to whoever they're thinking about voting for and to make their own mind up, which I think is a better way of doing it because ultimately you don't want to alienate people potentially who do want to support the Rivers Trust, but they might lean one way or the other. So I think you've done it in the right way.
Oh, thank you. Well, also, you're just bombarded with information at this time, aren't you?
Yeah,
So what one of the things we've done is one of my colleagues, Kezia, went through all of the manifestos and pulled out all of the bits that were relevant to rivers and nature so that you don't have to, basically.
yeah,
And I personally was very grateful to her for doing that. And we've had lots of responses saying, oh, thanks, because everybody does want to know, okay, how does this party align with my personal interests? But the documents are hefty, you know?
yeah,
So
they are. Probably
that's the role we've
slightly
taken on this stuff.
intentionally hefty as well, if I was going to be pessimistic. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, no, that all makes sense. So look, if people if they've still not made their mind up, they got 2 days now as of recording. They can go to the Rivers Trust website and this got all the information there.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to the riverstrust.org or just search for the phrase vote for rivers, and that should bring up all of our blog posts as well. But yeah, the riverstrust.org, you'll see it splashed across the top. You can find the questions that we've got for candidates that we've mentioned today. We've got a couple of actions that you can take, and you can find our manifesto analysis, which is hopefully really useful. Or just head to our social media. It's splattered all across those too.
And you've got a template, is that right? Like an email template? So, I mean, I don't know if your candidates will get back to you now with 20, they might do, who knows? But if you want to email them about this, all you literally need to do is copy this and put in the relevant bits for your candidate. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. An email template, send it off to them. They might not be checking too much in the last 2 days, but why
I don't
not?
know.
Give it a go.
Yeah, it's worth one. Well, look, yeah, it's fascinating, and I think it's really good information to have out there, and obviously give people some food for thought for who they're voting, and with a little bit of luck, put Rivers a little bit higher up the agenda.
Here's hoping. Well, thanks,
Right.
Jack. Thanks for giving us some time and thanks for supporting Rivers as well in everything you do.
Oh, cheers. All right, take care.
Cheers.
I'll stop recording.